Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the Snakening, as we cover the West's continuous attempts to throw Ukraine under the bus and evade all responsibility for the ongoing disaster. I apologize if the quality isn't very good on this, but I'm away from my computer, mic, and general setup, so I'm having to record this on my phone. So, here we go. Ukraine doesn't need all its territory to defeat Putin. Once again, I thought it was as long as it takes. I thought every square inch, including Crimea, was going to be retaken. Now it's like, well, we're going to move the goalpost. The report in the New York Times, now I find this kind of weird. I guess this is from, no, wait a minute, this is from the New York Times. So the New York Times is like referring to itself in the third person. He's like, the new report in the New York Times. So shouldn't it be like our new report or... I don't know. It seems kind of weird grammatically to me, but that's okay. That Russia is quietly signaling a readiness to freeze the war in Ukraine is both suspicious and tantalizing. I like the extremely low tier gaslighting here, where they're trying to tell Russia that they're trying to freeze the war. Is there any evidence that Russia is going to freeze the war? No. Does Russia have any reason to freeze the war? No. I mean, as it's been said many times by the U.S. and the rest of NATO, as soon as this war ends, Ukraine will join NATO, and then it'll be covered by, I think it was Article 5, and then Russia will never be able to attack it again. So why would Russia want to freeze the conflict? Because if they freeze the conflict, ostensibly Ukraine would join NATO, and this is their one opportunity to resolve that question forever. And so they're trying to gaslight Russia, and it's like, in those really, in cartoon shows, whenever the guy's doing the magic trick, he's like, you are thinking of the 5 of diamonds. And the guy's like, no, I'm not. No, you're thinking of the 5 of diamonds. You're thinking of an armistice. The caveats are many. An armistice would leave Vladimir Putin in control of about 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. He is not trustworthy. He could use prolonged negotiations to bolster his forces for a renewed push, or to lure Western lawmakers into cutting aid for Ukraine. I mean, that's already happened. He may be stalling in the hope that Donald Trump, his preferred choice for president, will return to the White House and stiff Ukraine. I mean, Biden stiffed Ukraine. Like, Biden has snaked on Ukraine. We've been over this. He said, as long as we can. The Republicans said to him, look, secure the border, give us a budget, tell us where the money's going, and we'll give you the funds. And Biden's like, no, I won't secure the border, even if it means like the destruction of Ukraine and global thermonuclear war. I'd rather have that happen than secure the border. Okay, but if Mr. Putin turns out to be serious, Ukraine should not pass up an opportunity to end the bloodshed. Recovered territory is not the only measure of victory in this war. They've been saying that for like years, like 2 years now, that is the only metric. Remember when like Russia withdrew from Kiev? They said that was a victory because they retook territory. Remember when like Russia was overextended and it withdrew from a bunch of territory it couldn't defend to shorten its defensive lines and to occupy like choke points and stuff like that? That was a loss. So no, by their logic, they have always defined this war solely in terms of territorial acquisition. A painful reality check shows the 600-mile-long Ukrainian-Russian front is in a figurative and literal freeze. I mean, it's not. Like, Russia just isn't launching big aero offensives. But Marinka fell. I think Avdiivka is going to fall pretty much whenever now. It's like encircled. The Russians are gradually making advances. It's just not very quick. So ironically, they're saying territory doesn't mean everything, but Russia's not winning because they're not getting territory. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not big-brained enough to understand this. Draining Ukrainian resources and lives without much prospect for change in the foreseeable future. I'm going to have to press exit out on that one. The much anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive of the past 6 months exacted a huge cost in casualties and material, but barely nudged the front lines. Ukraine's top military commander has said the fight is at a stalemate, a notion deemed taboo not long ago. I mean, You guys said that was too. You said this was wrong. Like, I don't know. And only an unlikely technological breakthrough by one side or the other could break it. What does that mean? Like, I don't know what that means. As the year draws to an end, lawmakers in the United States and Europe have separately held up critically needed aid packages for Ukraine, and there's no certainty how they will fare in the new year. Well, Biden won't secure the border, so yeah, it's just not going to happen. The conflict could still take an unexpected turn, as it has before, but the prospect of this juncture is one of long war of attrition, inflicting even more damage on Ukraine, sacrificing ever more lives and spreading instability over Europe. The way things are going, Ukraine will, for the foreseeable future, harbor Europe's most dangerous geopolitical fault line. I mean, what other one would be as dangerous as like a full-scale war? A new history of the war. He foresees an endless conflict that deepens Russia's alienation from the West, enshrines Putinism, and delays Ukraine's integration into Europe. I mean, Ukraine is not going to be integrated into Europe. Like, let's just be real about this. There is, what's her name said that Ukraine's accomplished more than 90% of what's required to join the EU. Because, like, I guess human rights, economic development, being involved in an active war, not having an authoritarian government, all these things are not requirements for EU membership, which is, I guess, good to know. Let's see here. Where were we? That at least is the bleak prognosis of victory in the war continues to be defined in territorial terms. But you were literally, the New York Times and co were the only people who were discussing it that way. Russia has never said this war was about territorial gains. This was about destroying the Ukrainian army and reducing it to a point where they could just finish them off at their leisure. That was the strategy. That's why they called it Operation Bakhmut Meat Grinder. That's why they haven't launched big air offensives since the Ukrainian armies got their stuff together. Okay, the goal of driving Russia out of all of the Ukrainian lands it occupied in 2014 and over the past 22 months, including Crimea and a thick wedge of southern Ukraine, altogether about a fifth of Ukraine's sovereign territory. But regaining territory is the wrong way to imagine the best outcome. True victory for Ukraine is to rise from the hell of war as a strong, independent, prosperous, and secure state firmly planted in the West. See, guys, Ukraine doesn't need to win the war to win the war. It just needs to win the war to win the war. It needs to win it economically and industrially. Now, we're going to ignore for a fact that the wealthiest part of Ukraine was in the east, the areas that Russia has occupied. I think Odysee is also, at least was fairly wealthy. But like the industry and mining, I think was all in the Donbass and the other regions it's occupied. Crimea also, I think, was economically productive. So if we're going to go by that measure, like a lot of what's left is kind of the backwater of the country. Let's see here. It would be exactly what Mr. Putin most feared from a neighboring state with deep historical ties to Russia. And it would be a testament to what Russia promised to become in 1991 when both countries broke free of the Soviet Union before Mr. Putin entered the Kremlin and succumbed to grievance and the lure of dictatorial power and imperial illusion. So the U.S. is saying that they're criticizing a country for its leadership succumbing to grievance and the lure of dictatorial power and imperial illusion. That is something U.S. presidents have never wanted. Any talk of an armistice is understandably difficult for Zelenskyy. No, it's impossible because the Banderites will kill him. The intrepid Ukrainian president, who has steadfastly sought to project a morale-boosting picture of steady battlefield successes, it would be very painful and politically very difficult for him to halt the fighting without punishing Russia and by leaving it in control of so much Ukrainian land. After his senior military commander Valery Zelenskyy described the true state of the affairs as a stalemate in an interview, Mr. Zelenskyy bristled at what he perceived as defeatism. So, like, guys, it's a stalemate. Nothing's happening. but Ukraine's also losing, but Ukraine's also winning. We don't even know what the narrative is anymore. Just give us money, I think, is how we can describe this. But to explore an armistice is not to walk away. On the contrary, the fight must go on. It's like, look, guys, it's an armistice, but not necessarily an armistice. A freeze to the conflict, but not a frozen conflict. We just, like, I don't even really know what they're calling for here. Those people are resisting continued aid to Ukraine, whether some Republicans in Congress or Viktor Orban in Hungary must not be allowed to abandon the Ukrainians now. Well, like, they don't have a choice. Because part of democracy is you aren't allowed to express your opinion on your support or not support for a geopolitical project. That's good to know. If Mr. Putin is seriously looking for a ceasefire, he's doing so on the presumption that the alternatives is a continued slaughter of his soldiers and that there is nothing more he can achieve through destruction, violence, or bluster. Once again, this is like the worst attempt at gaslighting ever. Is Putin like begging for mercy? He gave a speech like a little while ago basically saying, no, they're in it to win it. They're in it until all the goals are accomplished. The Russian parliament has started discussing like what they like humiliating terms will be on Ukraine once the thing is over. Like there's no, we're not at that stage at all. Ukraine and much of the world would not accept his annexation of any Ukrainian territory. Russia's army has been mauled and humiliated, and the country's economy has been severed for the West. Note that they don't say it's in tatters anymore. Note that they don't say it's in recession. They're just saying he isn't able to buy stuff from Europe. And this is like the whole narrative, once again, that Russia's diplomatically isolated. Like they're only friends with India, China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Brazil, Ethiopia, Egypt, Syria. They have a working relationship with Turkey, even if it's kind of tsundere. But it's no and most of Africa. But Russia's completely isolated, guys. It's isolated. Its economy only grew by like 3.5%, and they only have a balanced budget. There wasn't a surplus. I mean, like, do you know how happy like conservatives of the U.S. would be if the U.S. had a balanced budget? Yeah. Anyways, Mr. Putin launched the invasion 22 months ago, convinced that it really would be a special military operation, that the Ukrainian government would promptly cave, that the West would prove impotent, and that a Moscow-installed Quisling would ensure Ukraine never became independent, successful, free, or joined the EU. Have any of those things happened? How is it a failure if none of those things have happened? Also, once again, I mean, it's kind of rich coming from America. Like, they always do this with like these like G slur names for like it's a police action. It's an authorization for the use of force. Unfortunately, no one uses the term war anymore. We have to come up with these really lame euphemisms. Anyways, instead, Russia was forced into a chaotic retreat from Kiev, but we were just told literally earlier in this article that territorial gain doesn't matter. So which is it? And plunged into a terribly costly war with a stalwart Ukraine backed by billions of dollars worth of American arms and funds. It took Russian forces led by mercenaries more than a year and massive casualties to capture one city, Bakhmut. Like, once again, this is such like shit tier thinking. It's like saying it took the Russians a year and hundreds of thousands of casualties to capture Stalingrad. It took the Soviets a year and hundreds of thousands of casualties to capture Berlin. It's just these cities, like it's every city you take in a war is exactly the same. It's like it's the same as when Japan captured Nanjing, as when it captured some goat path with like 5 dudes that live in it, like the half a kilometer away. It's like it's just the same. It's the same, guys. It doesn't matter. Another town, Avdiivka, is still in Ukrainian hands despite wave after wave of soldiers. many of them ill-prepared reservists and conscripts thrown against it, because that does not happen in Ukraine. Ukraine does not have an issue with. Wait a minute, the New York Times, that was, I think, an article from the New York Times about the people snatchers. Like, and this is what they always have to do, and this is how these articles undermine themselves, is basically they're throwing Ukraine under the bus, but they're in cope mode, so they have to pretend that Russia is losing. So none of it really makes any sense. They're like, well, Russia's losing, they're defeated, their economies collapse, their army's in tatters, but we still have to negotiate. And you're like, why? Best and brightest have fled the country. Untold thousands of Russian soldiers have been sent to their slaughter, and untold thousands more of Russia's best and brightest have fled the country. Once again, like, this happened way more with Ukraine. Whether to avoid the war or imprisonment for imposing it, well, but Zelenskyy imprisons people who oppose the war. Zelenskyy forcibly conscripts people who oppose the war. Like, Gonzalo Lira was put in jail. I mean, Gonzalo Lira was really stupid in what he did, but it's objectively true that people are forcibly conscripted or put in jail in Ukraine for opposing the war. So, mismanagement of the war prompted a short-lived mutiny by the head of the mercenary Prigozhin, followed by his death in a plane crash, almost certainly engineered by the Kremlin. They don't present any evidence for that. I think it was the Kremlin. It could have been like anybody, though. It could have been someone else at Wagner. It could have been a business rival. It could have been a Western intelligence agency. I mean, Prigozhin had a long list of enemies. It could have honestly just been, like, stupidity, to be perfectly honest. Crushing sanctions have put an end to nearly all business with the West and has fueled spiraling inflation. I don't think that's true. I think Russia's inflation rate is actually lower than the US's. I think it's like 3% or something like that. I guess that's spiraling inflation. Russia economy got a short-term boost from feeding the military machine and filling the gaps left by sanctions. Long-term prospects are bleak. Okay, so guys, it didn't work before now, but it's gonna work. It's gonna work. We just need to do more sanctions. Russia can only trade with China, India, Brazil, Egypt, Ethiopia, the rest of Africa, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Vietnam, and like all those countries. They can only trade with those. They can't trade with Western Europe and America, and that's the only economies that actually matter. I don't even think, has Japan sanctioned Russia? I don't even know if Japan and South Korea have sanctioned Russia. Because my understanding is historically Russia actually has decent relations with South Korea. So, anyways, in many ways, Mr. Putin has achieved the opposite of what he set out to do. The Ukrainian nation, whose existence he poo-pawed, has been steeled in fire. And on December 14th, the European Union formally agreed to open accession negotiations with Ukraine. So, if Turkey can't join the EU, why would Ukraine be able to join the EU? Like, let's just think about this for a second. Very west. Okay, Finland has joined NATO, and Sweden is edging closer to membership. These are not the elements of victory. It's over, guys. It's Jover, guys. Finland has joined the battle. Together, we will crush the Bolsheviks. Finland and Sweden are against Russia now. That is evidence that they're losing. They're open negotiations with Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine doesn't fulfill any of the terms to join the EU. Is the EU actually, like, so is there logic that Ukraine's going to join the EU while it's at war? I don't even know. There are also no reasons for false hopes. After his recent visit to Washington, Mr. Zelenskyy should have no illusion that the American spigot is wide open, especially if Mr. Trump returns to the White House. At his joint news conference with Mr. Zelenskyy, President Biden, whose mantra has long been to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, rephrased the pledge to read "as long as we can." In the European Union, Mr. Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister and admirer of Mr. Putin, Mr. Trump, has tied up approval of another 50 billion euros for Ukraine. I mean, from my understanding, what wound up happening was they froze a whole bunch of Hungarian assets for no reason. And he's like, look, you're going to have to unfreeze my assets and then I'll let you vote it. And they're like, no, we can't let you have your legal property. So it is understandable that the prospect of pumping endless resources into a stalled military operation would incur resistance. It would be harder for these skeptics to question additional aid if there was a prospect of an end to the fighting and the shift to the reconstruction of Ukraine. An armistice would not be easy to achieve or to police, but conversations and writings about various potential models have been quietly circulating in government and think tank circles. Yeah, and this is something that always gets on my nerves. I hate it when they use the same word twice. Like they say circulating in circles. I just don't like that for some reason. Samuel Chaprap of the Rand Corporation and Jeremy Shapiro of the European Council on Foreign Relations argued that however dim the prospect of peace, the war will probably end through some sort of negotiation. Yeah. Well, I mean, theoretically, World War I and World War II ended in some sort of negotiation. So, I mean, if that's the standard you want to go to, I would not go down that route if I were you, though. The next, okay, so let's see. Green stop, disengage. The next hurdle will be to devise a security arrangement that would give Ukraine the assurances it needs while taking account of Russia's opposition to a full NATO member on its western border. Many other issues would enter into the mix. Russian war crimes, reparations, sanctions, and any armistice would be far short of a final settlement. So, like, guys, unless Russia is tried for war crimes, we can't even have this negotiation. Because I'm sure Russia is going to agree to that. I'm sure Russia is going to say, yeah, Putin's going to go to the jail in the International Criminal Court. That's 100% going to happen. But if the only way to find out if Mr. Putin is serious about a ceasefire and whether one can be worked out is to give it a try, halting Russia well short of its goals and turning to the reconstruction modernization of Ukraine would be lasting tributes. But they said Russia has already lost. I don't know. Preserve the existence of their nation, and no temporary armistice would, however, preclude Ukraine from recovering all of its land. So basically, they're just saying we are going to gaslight Russia into thinking that they want a ceasefire that they don't want. And then we're going to use that opportunity to rebuild Ukraine and rebuild the Ukrainian army. And the ceasefire is going to be fake. And we're not actually going to make any kind of concessions to Russia. They're still going to have to pay reparations. They're still going to have to face war crimes trials. But none of it makes any sense. But it is them acknowledging that they aren't going to get all the territory back. It is them moving the goalposts. It is them throwing Ukraine under the bus. It's just in a more confused and less coherent way than what we've seen. But there's some more of the snakening. Sorry once again for the various audio problems, but I'm having to record this on my phone. So God bless everybody. Happy New Year. I'll talk to you all again real soon.